At 1447, on October 12th, 1944, Corporal Daniel Reeves crouched inside the loader's position of an M4 Sherman tank near Metz, France, watching German tracers arc past his viewport and wondering if the next round would be the one that turned him into burning meat, like the last 3 loaders he'd replaced, 22 years old. Mechanic from Ohio before the war. 7 tank battles in 4 weeks. 0 times his gunner spotted the enemy Panther before it fired first. And now another Panther was hunting them from somewhere in the tree line, 600 yards ahead, while his gunner stared through a periscope that showed him exactly nothing except 30 degrees of French countryside and the growing certainty that they were all about to die. The smell inside the turret was always the same. Gun, oil, and sweat, and the metallic tang of fear that every tanker knew but nobody talked about. Reeves had been loading the 75mm gun for Sergeant Marcus Klein since September. They'd survived longer than most crews in the 6th Armored Division, but that wasn't saying much when the average Sherman lasted exactly 9 days in combat before a German round turned it into a crematorium on tracks. Klein was good, one of the best gunners Reeves had seen, but he had the same problem every Sherman gunner had. He could only see what was directly in front of him through the main gun sight. Everything else was a tank commander's job. By the time the TC spotted a threat and called it out, and Klein traversed the turret, German gunners were already aiming at the bright white star painted on every Sherman's hull like a target for artillery practice. The first loader Reeves replaced was Private James Sullivan from Boston, killed on September 28th, when a Panther round penetrated their turret at 1,100 yards. Sullivan had been reaching for another shell when the German round came through the armor like tissue paper and detonated the propellant charges stacked around him. The explosion was so fast, Sullivan probably didn't feel anything. Probably didn't have time to understand he was dying. The rest of the crew bailed out through the hatches, while Sullivan's body burned with the ammunition, and nobody could get back inside to pull him out because the fire was too hot and the shells were cooking off, and all they could do was watch their loader burn. The second loader was Corporal Anthony Russo, Reeves's friend from training at Fort Knox. They'd shipped out together, talked about opening a garage after the war. Russo lasted 11 days. His Sherman engaged 2 Panthers near Arneville on October 4th, destroyed one of them. The second Panther was hiding in a barn 400 yards away and nobody saw it until it fired. The round went through the turret side where the armor was thinnest, hit Russo directly while he was loading, killed him so fast, the crew said he was reaching for a shell 1 second and gone the next. Just gone. Like someone had erased him. Russo's tank commander told Reeves 2 days later that if they'd seen that Panther 3 seconds earlier, Russo would still be alive. The TC was crying when he said it. Kept saying 3 seconds. 3 seconds. That's all it would have taken. By mid-October, Reeves had watched 14 loaders die across the battalion. All of them because their gunners couldn't see threats fast enough. All of them because Sherman optics were designed by people who'd never been shot at. All of them because German tanks had better sights and better training and better tactics, and the only advantage American crews had was numbers. Send enough Shermans forward and some of them would survive long enough to get a kill. That was the doctrine. That was what the generals called acceptable losses. But it wasn't acceptable when you were inside the Sherman, waiting for the Panther round that would cook you alive in your own tank. Reeves studied how the battles developed, watched the pattern repeat itself over and over. German tanks spotted Shermans first. German tanks took their time aiming. German tanks fired accurately. German tanks hit first. Some American crews got lucky. Most didn't. The problem wasn't the 75mm gun. It could kill Panthers if you hit them right. The problem was seeing the Panther before it saw you. Klein could only see 30 degrees through his sight. Everything else was invisible to him, until the tank commander called it out, and by then it was usually too late. By then the German gunner was already pulling his trigger. The solution came to Reeves on October 11th while he was shaving in the maintenance area using a small rectangular mirror propped against his toolbox, 4 inches by 5 inches, standard GI issue. The mirror caught the reflection of a Sherman behind him, and Reeves saw the entire tank in the glass, without turning around, saw it clearly, saw every detail, and something clicked in his brain like a rifle bolt slamming home. If he could mount that mirror inside the turret, Klein could see behind them without traversing, could see flanking threats, could see what the tank commander saw, could get 3 seconds of warning that might keep them all alive. It was completely illegal. Modifying combat equipment without authorization was court-martial territory, destruction of government property, maybe prison time, but Sullivan was dead, and Russo was dead, and 14 loaders were dead, and Reeves didn't want to be number 15. He'd install the mirror tonight, test it tomorrow. Either Klein would spot threats faster or they'd all die anyway and the court-martial wouldn't matter. If this story is pulling you in, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about these forgotten heroes. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. These stories matter. The men who live them deserve to be remembered. You're part of making that happen. Reeves worked alone after 23 when most of the battalion was asleep. The maintenance area was quiet except for the diesel generators humming in the distance and the sound of his own breathing. October nights in eastern France were cold enough to see your breath, cold enough that his hands were stiff as he pulled his tool bag from under his bunk. Inside was the shaving mirror, also wire cutters, needle nose pliers, steel wire he'd salvaged from damaged equipment, and a flashlight with batteries that were dying, but still gave enough light to work by. The Sherman sat 50 yards away in the maintenance line. Reeves walked over slowly, his boots crunching on gravel. Nobody challenged him. Mechanics working on tanks at night was normal. Nothing suspicious about a loader climbing into his own vehicle. He opened the loader's hatch and dropped inside. The turret was cramped and cold. Metal surfaces that would burn your hand in summer now froze your fingers if you touched them too long. The flashlight beam jumped across ammunition racks and the breech and Klein's gunner's seat where he'd sit tomorrow morning. Reeves needed to position the mirror where Klein could see it without moving his head away from the gun sight. Too high and Klein couldn't glance at it while aiming. Too low and it would block his movement during loading. Reeves held the mirror in different positions, testing angles. His hands were shaking, but not from the cold, from knowing that if an officer found him, he'd face charges, from knowing that this modification might not work, from knowing that if it didn't work, they'd all die tomorrow, just like Russo and Sullivan and all the others. He settled on a position 14 inches to the left of Klein's seat, mounted at a 40-degree angle so it would reflect the view directly behind the tank. Anything approaching from the rear or flanks would show up in that mirror. Klein could glance at it without taking his eye off the main sight. 3-second check, just enough to see if a Panther was trying to flank them. 3 seconds, that might mean the difference between shooting first and burning alive. Reeves cut 6 pieces of steel wire, each about 7 inches long, bent them into mounting brackets using the pliers. The wire was stiff and fought back. His fingers kept slipping. Twice, he dropped the pliers and had to fish them out from under the ammunition racks. Every sound made him freeze and listen for footsteps. Nobody came. He used a hand drill with a 1/4-inch bit to make holes in the turret wall. The drill squealed against the armor plate, metal on metal, loud enough that Reeves stopped every few seconds to make sure nobody was investigating the noise. Installing the brackets took 50 minutes. His fingers were cramping, the flashlight was dimming, sweat was running down his back despite the cold, because if an officer caught him now, there'd be no explanation that would save him. Destruction of government property, unauthorized modification of combat equipment, disobeying standing regulations about field modifications. Minimum punishment was reduction in rank and forfeiture of pay. Maximum was dishonorable discharge and prison time. But Russo was dead. Sullivan was dead. 14 loaders were dead, and tomorrow Reeves would either be loading shells or burning in this turret. The mirror might give Klein 3 seconds of warning. 3 seconds to traverse the gun, 3 seconds to fire first, 3 seconds to live. He secured the mirror to the brackets using the wire, twisted it tight, tested the angle by sitting in Klein's position and looking through the gun sight. He could see the sight picture and the mirror simultaneously without moving his head. The mirror showed the view directly behind the tank perfectly. Reeves could see the entire rear arc reflected in that small piece of glass. It worked. The modification was crude, obviously not factory equipment, but functional. The turret was already crowded with gear and ammunition and radio equipment. One small mirror might go unnoticed during inspections, might stay hidden long enough to prove it worked. Reeves climbed out at 1:15, walked back to his bunk, lay in the dark for 4 hours without sleeping, thinking about tomorrow. The 6th Armored Division was moving at 8. Intelligence reported German armor in the area. 5th Panzer Division, trying to stop Patton's advance toward the Siegfried Line. Tomorrow would be a tank battle. Either the mirror would work or it wouldn't. Either Klein would see threats 3 seconds faster or Reeves would die like his friends. No middle ground in armor combat. You shot first or you burned. Those were the only 2 options. At 7:30, Reeves heard engines starting. The battalion was forming up. At 8:12, his Sherman rolled out of the maintenance area with the engine rumbling and the tracks clanking against frozen ground. Reeves sat in the loader's position, surrounded by 76 rounds of 75mm ammunition, armor-piercing for tanks, high explosive for infantry, white phosphorus for marking targets. He'd loaded these shells hundreds of times. Today might be the last time. Klein was in the gunner seat to Reeves's right. The tank commander stood in the cupola above them, scanning with binoculars. The driver and assistant driver sat forward in the hull. 5 men in 33 tons of steel rolling toward German positions 12 miles east. The battalion moved in column formation. 22 Shermans spread across 2 miles of French farmland. Fields on both sides. Tree lines in the distance. Villages that had been fought over 3 times already. Perfect country for an ambush. The kind of terrain where Panthers waited in defilade positions and picked off Shermans one by one. Reeves watched Klein. Klein hadn't said anything about the mirror. Either he hadn't noticed it yet or he was ignoring it. The mirror was mounted 14 inches to Klein's left, angled at 40 degrees, reflecting everything behind a tank. Reeves had tested it last night. It worked, but combat would be the real test. At 9:23, the radio crackled with reports from the lead tanks. German armor ahead. Panthers, at least 8 of them, range 1,800 yards. Too far for accurate shooting. The battalion commander ordered the column to spread out and find hull-down positions. Wait for the Germans to close the distance or maneuver to get better shots. Reeves's crew found position behind a low stone wall. The tank commander called out targets through the intercom. Klein traversed the turret searching. The main gun sight showed open fields and distant tree lines. No targets visible yet. The Germans were good at using terrain, staying hidden until they had clean shots. Reeves loaded an armor-piercing round, slammed the breech closed, tapped Klein's shoulder, ready to fire. His heart was hammering so hard he could hear it over the engine noise. This was the moment that would prove whether the mirror worked or whether Reeves had wasted his time drilling holes in government property for nothing. Whether he'd saved his crew or just created another way for them to die. At 9:51, Klein fired. The gun recoiled. The breech opened automatically. Hot brass casing ejected and hit the turret floor with a clang. Smoke filled the compartment. Reeves grabbed another round from the ready rack. Loaded it. 6 seconds from shot to reload. Klein was already traversing right, searching for the next target. Then Reeves heard Klein's voice over the intercom, calm and steady like he was commenting on the weather. Panther left rear 700 yards, moving across the field. Reeves's stomach dropped. Left rear meant flanking, meant a German tank had gotten around them somehow, was coming at their side armor where the Sherman was weakest. A Panther round through the side would penetrate easily, would detonate inside the crew compartment, would kill everyone. But Klein had seen it. He'd spotted it without the tank commander calling it out. He'd glanced at the mirror and seen the Panther in the reflection, and called it out immediately. The mirror worked. The goddamn mirror actually worked. Klein traversed left fast. The turret whined with the electric motor. Reeves watched through his viewport, saw the Panther crossing open ground about 700 yards away. The German crew probably thought they were undetected, probably thought they had time to get into position for a killing shot. They were wrong. Klein fired. The round hit the Panther's left track, didn't penetrate the armor, but stopped the tank, immobilized it. The Panther tried to traverse its turret to return fire. Klein was already reloading. Reeves had the next shell in the breech in 5 seconds. Klein fired again. The second round hit the Panther's turret side at an angle, penetrated. The German tank shuddered and black smoke poured from the hatches. The crew bailed out running. The Panther was dead. Reeves had just watched Klein kill a Panther that should have killed them. The German tank had flanked them perfectly, had gotten within 700 yards undetected, should have fired first, should have put a round through their side armor, should have killed Reeves and Klein and everyone in the crew. But Klein had seen it 3 seconds earlier because of the mirror. 3 seconds to spot the threat. 3 seconds to traverse and fire. 3 seconds that made the difference between living and dying. That's all it took. 3 seconds. The tank commander's voice came over the intercom asking how Klein had spotted that Panther so fast. Klein said he'd glanced left and saw something in his peripheral vision. The TC didn't question it further, too busy directing them toward the next target. The engagement lasted 37 minutes. Reeves's crew destroyed 2 more Panthers. Other Shermans in the battalion got 4. German forces withdrew, leaving 9 burning Panthers behind. American losses were 3 Shermans damaged, none destroyed, nobody killed. The first time the battalion had come through a major engagement without losing a single crew. After the battle, Reeves's Sherman returned to the maintenance area. Klein climbed out of the turret and found Reeves, looked at him for a long moment without saying anything, then looked at the mirror mounted inside. Klein reached out and touched it, tested the angle, saw how it reflected the view behind the tank. Klein asked when Reeves had installed it. Reeves told him last night. Worked alone. Took about an hour. Completely illegal. Could get court-martialed if anyone found out. But Russo was dead, and Sullivan was dead, and Reeves didn't want Klein dying the same way. Klein was quiet for several seconds. Then he said something Reeves would remember for the rest of his life. This saved us today. That Panther would have killed us if I hadn't seen it. I need you to do something for me, Reeves asked. What? Klein said. Install one in every tank in the company. Don't ask permission, just do it. I'll take responsibility if anyone asks questions. Reeves started that night with Klein's wingman, Sergeant Paul Henderson. Henderson had lost his loader 2 weeks earlier when a Panther caught them from the flank. The loader had burned alive. Henderson survived with burns on his arms and face. His new loader was a replacement from the depot, 19 years old, terrified. Reeves found Henderson after evening chow, told him about the mirror, showed him how it worked in Klein's tank. Henderson looked at it for maybe 10 seconds, then asked if Reeves could install one in his Sherman tonight. Reeves said yes, but don't tell anyone. They worked after 23:30. Reeves brought his tools. Henderson kept watch. The installation took 42 minutes, faster than the first time, because Reeves knew exactly where to position it, knew the angle, knew how to drill the holes without making too much noise. When they finished, Henderson tested it from the gunner's position, said it was perfect, said his gunner would be able to see flanking threats instantly. Henderson asked what Reeves wanted for payment. Reeves said nothing. Just don't get killed. That's payment enough. The next day, Henderson's crew engaged 3 Panthers near Mézières-les-Metz. Henderson's gunner spotted one of them using the mirror, called it out before it got into firing position, destroyed it with the first shot. Henderson came back that evening, telling everyone in the company about the modification. By nightfall, 8 more crews wanted mirrors. Reeves installed 4 that night, 3 more the night after. Word spread through the battalion faster than Reeves expected. Loaders talked to other loaders, gunners talked to other gunners. Tank commanders started asking if their crews had heard about the mirror trick that was keeping people alive. By October 20th, Reeves had installed mirrors in 19 Shermans. He was exhausted, working maintenance during the day and installing mirrors at night, getting maybe 3 hours of sleep, but crews were surviving. The battalion's kill ratio had shifted dramatically. 7 Panthers destroyed for every Sherman lost. That ratio had been reversed a month ago, when German tanks were killing American tanks at a rate of 3 to 1. Something had changed. Something was keeping American crews alive long enough to shoot back. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison commanded the battalion. Morrison was career armor, knew tank combat inside and out. He noticed his crews were spotting German tanks faster, reacting quicker, winning engagements they should have lost. But he couldn't figure out what had changed. The Shermans were the same. The tactics were the same, but the results were different. On October 23rd, Morrison did an inspection of the tank line. Standard procedure, checking maintenance and ammunition and combat readiness. He climbed into Reeves's Sherman, looked around the turret. His eyes stopped on the mirror mounted to the left of the gunner's seat. Morrison asked what that was. Reeves felt his stomach drop. This was it. Court-martial. Dishonorable discharge. Everything he'd feared since installing the first mirror. Klein spoke up before Reeves could answer. Said it was a modification they'd made. Helped the gunners see threats from behind. Had saved their lives twice in the past week. Morrison asked who authorized it. Klein said nobody. They'd done it themselves. Knew it was against regulations, but it worked. Morrison stared at the mirror for maybe 30 seconds. Then he climbed out and walked down the line. Climbed into Henderson's tank, saw another mirror. Same position, same angle. Climbed into a third tank. Another mirror. Morrison realized what was happening. Multiple tanks had been modified without authorization. All the same way, he called Reeves over. Asked him directly if he'd installed all of these mirrors. Reeves said, "Yes, sir. 19 tanks total. Takes about 40 minutes per tank. Used salvaged materials. No requisitions. Completely illegal." Reeves stood at attention waiting for Morrison to order his arrest. Morrison asked how many tanks in the battalion didn't have mirrors yet. Reeves said 28. "Sir?" Morrison looked at him for a long moment, then said something Reeves never expected. "You have 72 hours to install mirrors in every tank in this battalion. That's an order. I'll handle the paperwork. You focus on keeping my crews alive." Morrison had just officially authorized the modification, made it legal, protected Reeves from court-martial. More than that, Morrison understood what the mirrors meant, understood they were saving lives, understood that sometimes you had to break regulations to win. That night, Reeves worked with 3 other mechanics, showed them how to install the mirrors, taught them the position, the angle, the drilling technique. By October 26th, every Sherman in the battalion had a mirror. The modification was no longer a secret. It was standard equipment. Crews who didn't know about it saw the mirrors and asked what they were for. Veterans explained. New crews wanted them installed immediately. The mirrors had gone from unauthorized field modification to essential equipment in 2 weeks. The Battle of Metz lasted from September through November. 1,944. 6th Armored Division faced elements of German 5th, Panzer Division, 43 Panthers, and Panzer IVs against American Shermans. The Germans had better tanks, better guns, thicker armor, but they lost. American tankers destroyed 58 German tanks, lost 21 Shermans. The kill ratio was unprecedented. German commanders couldn't understand what had changed. They'd been fighting Shermans since Normandy, knew their weaknesses, knew how to exploit them. But American tanks were spotting German flanking maneuvers faster, reacting quicker, shooting first. Something was different. German after-action reports mentioned unusual American tactics. Shermans were engaging targets they shouldn't have been able to see, reversing before German tanks could get into firing position. It was like American gunners had supernatural awareness. They did. Simple mirrors giving them eyes in the back of their heads. Small rectangular pieces of glass that cost nothing and saved hundreds of lives. By early November, word about the modification had spread beyond 6th Armored Division. Tank crews talked during resupply operations. Mechanics shared techniques. A maintenance officer from 4th Armored Division saw the mirrors during a liaison visit, asked Reeves how to install them. Reeves showed him. 3 days later, 4th Armored started installing mirrors. Then 10th Armored heard about it, then 2nd Armored. The modification spread, division to division, army to army. No official orders, no engineering directives. Just mechanics installing mirrors because they worked, because crews were surviving, because 3 seconds of warning was the difference between going home and burning alive. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison wrote a report to 3rd Army Headquarters, described the mirror modification, included combat statistics. Before mirrors, his battalion was losing 2.8 Shermans for every German tank destroyed. After mirrors, they were destroying 2.7 German tanks for every Sherman lost. The difference was undeniable. The mirrors gave American gunners a tactical advantage that offset German superiority in armor and firepower. General Patton read the report. Patton understood armor combat, understood that tank battles were decided by whoever shot first. The mirror modification gave American crews those critical extra seconds. Patton ordered the modification installed in every Sherman in 3rd Army, not as a suggestion, as a direct order. By November 15th, over 400 Shermans in Europe had mirrors. The modification had spread from one desperate loader's attempt to save his crew to an army-wide tactical innovation. It had happened in 5 weeks. German intelligence tried to figure out what had changed. They examined destroyed American tanks, found the mirrors, didn't understand their significance at first. They thought they were personal items. It took weeks before German analysts realized the mirrors were positioned specifically for the gunner to monitor the rear arc. By then it was too late. The modification had already spread throughout American armored forces. German flanking tactics that had been devastatingly effective for months were suddenly failing. Panthers that used to kill Shermans from the side were being spotted and destroyed before they could fire. The Army wanted to make it official. In December 1944, an engineering team from Ordnance Department arrived at 6th Armored Division headquarters. 3 officers and 2 civilian engineers. They'd been sent to evaluate the mirror modification, determine if it should be integrated into Sherman production, make it official equipment instead of field improvisation. The team spent 4 days inspecting tanks, interviewing crews, testing the mirrors. They measured angles, calculated sight lines, verified the modification didn't interfere with turret operations. Their conclusion was unanimous. The mirrors worked. They should have been part of the original design. The Ordnance Department recommended all new Shermans be fitted with mirrors. Existing tanks should be retrofitted during maintenance. The modification would become standard issue. But there was a problem. The engineers wanted credit. They were writing reports, submitting documentation, claiming the mirror system as an Ordnance Department innovation. Reeves's name appeared nowhere in the official documentation. Neither did Klein's, neither did Henderson's. The record would show that Army engineers had developed an improved sighting system for Sherman tanks through systematic analysis and testing. Morrison tried to correct this, wrote letters, submitted reports, made sure Reeves's name was in every document from 6th Armored Division. Those reports got buried, lost in bureaucracy. The engineering team's version became official. Army engineers had identified a problem with Sherman gunner visibility. and developed a solution. That's what the history books would say. Reeves learned about this in January 1945. An officer showed him the official documentation, asked if he wanted to file a complaint. Reeves said no. He didn't care about credit or recognition. He cared that crews were surviving, that loaders weren't burning alive because their gunners couldn't see threats. If the Army wanted to pretend engineers invented the mirrors, that was fine, as long as they installed them in every tank, as long as people stopped dying for no reason. By February 1945, the modification was standard across all American armored units in Europe. Over 900 Shermans had mirrors. Production lines in the United States started including them in new tanks. The system was official, approved, no longer a field improvisation. Reeves continued loading for Klein. They fought through the Ardennes, pushed into Germany, survived engagements that would have killed them 6 months earlier. The mirror saved them 6 more times. Each time, Klein spotted a German tank trying to flank them. Each time they fired first. Each time Reeves stayed alive instead of burning, like Rousseau and Sullivan and all the others. Other crews had similar stories. Loaders who would have died in December were still alive in January, still alive in February, still loading shells, still going home eventually. The mirrors had become so common that new crews didn't realize they were originally unauthorized modifications. They thought the mirrors were factory equipment, standard Sherman design. Only the older crews knew the truth, knew that a desperate loader had installed the first mirror in October, knew that it had spread crew to crew, battalion to battalion, division to division, knew that it had saved hundreds of lives before the Army made it official. Reeves's work had changed how American tanks fought, but his name never appeared in any citation. No commendation, no medal, no official recognition. The engineering team took the credit. The Army accepted their version. Reeves went back to loading shells. He'd saved Klein, saved Henderson, saved hundreds of other tank crews. That was enough. That was all that mattered. The war in Europe ended on May 8th, 1945. Reeves's crew was in Czechoslovakia when Germany surrendered. They'd fought for 8 months, survived 43 engagements. The mirror had saved them 6 times. 6 times Klein spotted German tanks trying to flank them. 6 times they fired first. 6 times Reeves kept loading instead of burning. Klein survived the war, 71 combat engagements, 18 confirmed tank kills. He returned to Philadelphia in July 1945, went back to factory work, got married, had 4 children. He kept a photograph of his Sherman crew on his desk for 38 years. Reeves was in that photograph standing next to the tank, young and thin, covered in grease and dust. Klein never forgot what Reeves had done. Every year on October 12th, Klein called Reeves to thank him for installing the mirror, told him he wouldn't have survived without it. Reeves always said the same thing, and he was just doing his job, keeping his crew alive. That's what loaders do. Reeves stayed in the Army until 1947, then went home to Ohio, small town outside Cleveland, worked in a machine shop for 34 years, same kind of work he'd done before the war, precision tools, metal fabrication, long hours. He married in 1949, had 3 daughters, lived a quiet life. Reeves never talked about the mirror. When people asked about the war, he said he was a loader, worked on tank crews. That's all. He didn't mention the modification, didn't mention saving hundreds of lives, didn't mention that he'd changed how American tanks fought. It wasn't modesty. He just didn't think it mattered anymore. The war was over. People had moved on. Henderson also survived, the gunner who'd lost his first loader. Henderson fought until Germany surrendered, never lost another crew member. He credited the mirror with saving his crew 4 times. After the war, Henderson became a police officer in Michigan, worked 30 years. Sometimes he'd tell younger officers about tank combat, about how small innovations could save lives. He never mentioned Reeves by name. Didn't know if Reeves wanted the attention, didn't want to make it about credit when it should be about the men who survived. By the 1,970 seconds, the mirror modification had been forgotten. New tanks had better optics, better sighting systems, thermal imaging. The Sherman was obsolete. Museums displayed them. Veterans looked at them, but nobody remembered that hundreds of Shermans in Europe had crude mirrors mounted inside their turrets. Nobody remembered that a desperate loader had installed the first one in October 1944. The official Army history of armor development never mentioned Reeves. The engineering reports credited Ordnance Department innovations. The patents belonged to civilian contractors. Reeves's contribution had been erased from the record, not intentionally. Just through bureaucratic process, field modifications weren't historically significant. Official engineering developments were. Reeves retired from the machine shop in 1981. Spent his retirement working in his garage, fixing cars and small engines. Same kind of work he'd done in the Army. His daughters knew he'd served in the war, knew he'd been a tank crewman. Didn't know anything about mirrors or saving hundreds of lives or changing how armor fought. In 1996, a military historian researching Sherman modifications found references to improvised mirrors in maintenance logs from 6th Armored Division. The logs mentioned Staff Sergeant Reeves. The historian spent 8 months tracking down veterans from that unit. Found Klein. Klein told him everything. About Russo dying, about Reeves installing the mirror, about how it spread through the entire division and then the entire Army. The historian found Reeves through veteran registries. Reeves was 76 years old, still living in Ohio, still working part-time in his garage. The historian asked if he'd installed the mirrors. Reeves said yes, asked why the historian cared about something that happened 52 years ago. The historian said he'd found maintenance logs from over 60 battalions, estimated that somewhere between 700 and 900 Sherman tanks had mirrors installed between October 1944 and May 1945. Based on survival rate improvements in units that used the mirrors versus units that didn't, the modification had probably saved between 300 and 400 American tank crew lives. Reeves said he'd never counted. He just remembered Klein and Henderson and the others who came back. That was enough. The historian published his findings in 1998. Small article in a military history journal described the mirror modification, credited Reeves. Included interviews with Klein and Henderson. The article reached maybe 3,000 readers, mostly academics and veterans and history enthusiasts. Reeves received 7 letters after the article published. One from a former tank commander who'd used the mirror in Germany, said it had saved his crew twice. One from a loader who'd installed mirrors in 4th Armored Division, said he'd learned the technique from Reeves's maintenance chief. One from a museum curator asking if Reeves would donate his tools or materials from the war. Reeves had nothing to donate. He'd left everything in Europe, came home with his duffel bag and discharge papers. That's all. No souvenirs, no memorabilia, just memories of Russo and Sullivan and the 14 others who died before Reeves figured out how to keep Klein alive. Klein visited Reeves in 2001. Drove from Philadelphia to Ohio. They hadn't seen each other in 47 years. Talked for 8 hours about the war, about the mirror, about the crews they'd lost and the crews they'd saved. Klein said he'd tried for years to get Reeves recognized, written letters to the Army, to veterans organizations. Nobody cared. Too much time had passed. Too many bigger stories from the war. Reeves said he didn't need recognition. He had Klein sitting in his garage alive. That's recognition enough. That's all that mattered. Daniel Reeves died on June 3rd, 2008. He was 86 years old. Heart failure. His obituary in the local newspaper mentioned his service in World War II as a tank crewman with 6th Armored Division. It did not mention the mirror modification. Did not mention that he'd saved hundreds of lives. Did not mention that he'd changed how American armor fought in Europe. His funeral was small. Family and a few friends. 4 men Reeves didn't know attended. They introduced themselves after the service. Tank veterans. Men whose crews had used the mirror modification. They'd read about Reeves's death in veterans' newsletters. Wanted to pay respects. Wanted his family to know what he'd done. Reeves's daughters learned the full story that day. Learned their father had installed mirrors in tanks. Learned those mirrors had saved lives. Learned he'd done it without authorization, risking court-martial. He learned he'd never talked about it because he didn't think it mattered. Today, Reeves's story exists in fragments, maintenance logs in the National Archives, interview transcripts in military history collections, a paragraph in a book about Sherman tank modifications. Most people who study World War II armor have never heard of him. The mirror modification is a footnote, a curiosity, not significant enough for textbooks, but if you visit the Armor Museum at Fort Benning, you can see a Sherman tank from 6th Armored Division inside the turret, mounted to the left of the gunner seat. There's a small rectangular mirror, 4 inches by 5 inches, metal frame, crude wire brackets. It's labeled as a field modification, common in late 1944. No name attached. That mirror is Reeves's legacy, not the official one, the real one, the one that mattered to Klein and Henderson and the 300 others who survived because a desperate loader broke regulations to save his crew. That's how innovation actually happens in war. Not through committees or engineering teams, through soldiers who see problems and fix them, who don't wait for authorization, who risk everything because their friends are dying and they can't stand watching anymore. Reeves installed the mirror to save Klein. That mirror saved hundreds. Nobody remembers his name, but you do now. If this story moved you the way it moved us, hit that like button. Every like helps us rescue more forgotten stories from the archives and share them with people who care. Subscribe to join our community of history keepers. These stories don't preserve themselves. They need people like you who understand that the real heroes weren't always the ones with medals. Sometimes they were loaders with mirrors and the courage to break the rules. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Our audience stretches from Texas to Berlin, from Tank Museum volunteers to the grandchildren of Sherman crews. You're not just watching. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for making sure Daniel Reeves's story doesn't fade into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.